While in most countries, profiling people is not unusual when it comes to immigration and customs matters. But in Hong Kong, some minorities believe they're unfairly singled out because of their skin color. It's a difficult issue, balancing security concerns with people's rights. But are the scales tipping in favor of discrimination? Critics say yes. Kai Tak. Tens of thousands of people travel through the airport every day. But for those who come and go, some unexpectedly remain. Going through immigration and customs checks can mean a delay, but for some of the territory's minorities, it also means discrimination.
Where they are called upon to exercise a discretion. For instance, when a customs officer is authorized to make random checks, those random checks ought to be conducted on some more intelligible basis rather than a person's color or his facial features, which in my view appears to be the determining factor.
Nihal Jayawikrama is a Hong Kong resident and university professor. And he's speaking from experience. His conclusion is based on an incident just over a month ago while returning from a vacation with his family.
Our particular queue was moving fairly rapidly. A lot of people ahead had been waved past. And when it was our turn, I was asked by the customs officer on which flight we had arrived. So I gave the flight number, which was a Singapore Airlines flight from Singapore. And then he said, "Oh, you mean you came from Bombay via Singapore?" I said, "No, I don't mean I came from Bombay via Singapore. I have not been to Bombay. I'm not from Bombay. In fact, I'm not from India. I'm from Sri Lanka, and that's where I'm coming from." He said, "Well, he picked out one of the bags and asked me to open it. So I opened it, and he searched fairly carefully. Then he said, "Oh, people from your country bring drugs." So I asked him, "Which country is that?" He said, "Oh, India." So I said, "Look, a moment ago I told you I'm not from India or from Bombay, I'm from Sri Lanka." I don't think that had any effect.
But what apparently did was Jayawikrama's recording of the incident by jotting down the customs officer's identification.
Then he asked me, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm just noting down particulars of another instance of racial discrimination at customs."
But airport customs rejects the claim. It says decisions are random and not based on race. And it insists all passengers from all flights are given equal consideration.
Simply put, our attention is not only focused on people or cargo from drug source countries, but from all countries.
But the issue is hardly simple. Hong Kong is known as the hub of Asia, especially for smuggling activities. But officials admit with air traffic rules so stringent these days, firearms smuggling is less of a problem. And dogs are now employed to sniff out any contraband. So, is it necessary to do secondary screening at the expense of what critics say is a humiliating experience for minorities? It's understood places like the United States and Australia combine the duties of customs and immigrations into one job. And that's basically carrying out primary line screening and nothing else. And some believe that's the best way to avoid possibly discriminatory checks. So can a balance be struck in Hong Kong between authorities trying to do their job without violating people's rights? Well, it's a question a countless number of countries face, but in most instances, it's answered with tough immigration and customs policies. But some say that doesn't make the practice of profiling passengers right.
I think customs officers, they are in a position of power, and of course, they can use the excuse of, random selection, but if that's not, what they're doing, and if they pick, people just depending on the color of the skin, and, we got to do something to correct their attitudes and to correct that type of behavior.
Despite the fact that they are excluded from the application of the Bill of Rights, a balance needs to be struck and a culture needs to be established for fairer treatment of people generally. When they act on prejudice, particularly if they are not aware of these prejudices, it makes the situation worse. There is no rationality to their action, and there is no consistency to their action.
But surprisingly, customs officials have admitted to Inside Story that the number of successful manual searches has been consistent with its so-called risk assessment techniques.
We are operating on risk assessment. Our emphasis is paid more on the risk factors. Risk factors has a wide implication on the profile of the passenger or cargo consignment, as well as the consignees of a cargo consignment, and also the place where the passenger had visited.
Authorities have revealed checking the belongings of certain nationals is paying off. But for some, that admission is alarming. Just how can authorities tell just by observation? Critics are questioning that, along with the legitimacy of such generalizations. They believe the territory's minorities already face an invisible battle against discrimination in Hong Kong. And if customs policy dictates stereotyping, some say it can only make matters worse.
Of course, the customs have a very legitimate job to perform. But what I find troublesome is that often what I have observed is that people who come from South Asia, and by that I mean people from Sri Lanka or from the Indian subcontinent, or people who appear to be from the Philippines, are stopped more often, far more often than others, and their baggage examined.
And some claim authorities do more than just searching.
I mean, I've heard unusual stories like not immigration, but let's say custom office. If you have sample clothing being brought back into your home country as samples of no commercial value, in one case that I became aware of, the immigration custom officer cut a hole through the garment to make sure that it wouldn't be sellable.
So could authority be abused? And what kind of recourse do Hong Kong people have if they feel their rights are being violated? Well, that's something Inside Story tried to ask the Home Affairs Branch, which deals with the territory's human rights issues. Officials refused to discuss the matter on camera, but the branch did issue a statement saying the duties and jurisdiction of customs are in line with the Bill of Rights. Well, so far this year, there have been 47 complaints against customs. For the whole of last year, it was 40. And most complaints had to do with the attitude and behavior of officers.
I would think that in most cases there is no recourse. Even if there is a recourse in terms of complaints procedure, most government investigations of immigration complaints, as far as I'm aware, frequently have turned out to be in favor of the immigration officer or the custom officer.
So what kind of effect do complaints have? Well, the Bill of Rights excludes immigration-related matters from its book. And for rights activists, that's even all the more reason for concern. But some believe the solution is easy to spot. It's education.
You see, always a certain type of people would be stopped. And I think that is some sort of institutional values that is imposed or instilled into the minds of those officers. Perhaps in the long run we got to take a look at the form of training, whether that type of negative stereotype is within that curriculum. If that is so, then what can we do about it?
Well, customs officers who are at the front lines doing searches undergo just over 3 months' worth of training. The curriculum covers a dozen areas. Not one involves social affairs in Hong Kong. How important is that for a customs officer to understand?
Well, sorry to interrupt you also, because this is only a very minute part of their training. This may be one of the areas they have, let the trainees see more and know more about the social side of Hong Kong.
But critics say unless government workers understand Hong Kong's cultural diversity better, chances for a colorblind society are dismal. And for those who fit the profile for searches, time will only tell if they'll get waved past, since prejudice knows no boundaries.